Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for attending my session today. I'm really excited to talk with you all about my topic, which is first year seminars for first generation college students. So my name is Amber May. I am the Director of Access and Community Engagement in the Access and Equity Office in the College of Agricultural Sciences at Penn State. And my role is to develop resources and programs for first generation as well as graduate students, in addition to helping improve Penn State Extension outreach in underserved communities in Pennsylvania. Today's session is titled Catch Me While You Can, Early Support for First Generation College Students via First Year Seminars. And I chose this topic after speaking with some first gen students at Penn State who said that one of the biggest challenges they see first gen students face is not connecting with campus resources early enough. They said that if you don't have a strong foundation by the end of your first year in particular, it's very hard to catch up once you start falling behind. And so after teaching two first year seminar courses last fall, one in SMEAL and one in agricultural sciences, I would like to propose using first year seminars tailored to first gen students as a way to build that foundation of resources and support that first gen students need when they start college. So we will go ahead and get into it. So I want to start with specifying what students this course could potentially serve at Penn State. And just a disclaimer, I will be providing data for undergraduates only, because while there are many first-gen graduate students at Penn State, they would not be taking a first-year seminar. We also won't get into the different definitions of first-gen college students, but we know that there are many different definitions out there that students, faculty, and staff may be using, and that could skew the following data depending on how individuals interpreted the questions. But if you're interested in helping better define first gen at PSU, consider joining First Gen Advisory Council, as that is a currently active project. But for statistical purposes, this is Penn State's official definition. So a first gen student is someone who neither immediate parent or guardian has completed a baccalaureate or four-year degree, right? And so according to Penn State's Data Digest, which if you haven't checked out before, I highly recommend doing so. This is the breakdown for first gen undergraduate enrollment for fall 2024. I want to highlight that the Commonwealth campuses, almost 40% of their enrollment is first gen students, which is a huge amount, especially when you compare it to only 17% at University Park, 29% at World Campus, and 25% across the entire university. We can also break it down by academic college, which I think is important when talking about first year seminars, because each college might have their own first year seminar. So at University Park, you can see the percentage and totals for each college. Engineering and liberal arts have the largest populations with over 1,000 first-gen students each. Agriculture, liberal arts, and nursing have the highest percentage of all the colleges as well, with over 20%, so that's important to keep in mind. You'll notice that nursing is 30%, although it's a low number. That is the highest percentage across all of the colleges. And so if you are in any of these colleges, keep these numbers in mind as you consider the scale of impact of a potential first-gen, first-year seminar for your students. So considering there's 25% of Penn State students are first-gen, what could, a quarter of Penn State students be experiencing? I think often we pay more attention to challenges students face. So I actually want to start with the strengths that first gen students have to offer to our university. First of all, they are highly motivated to succeed. So I think we can all agree that they worked really, really hard to get here, and they certainly belong and deserve to be here. And that's important to remind them of. They often attend college for their career and social mobility as well, whereas continuing generation students could have different motivations, such as family legacy or other things. First-gen students also tend to have a lower sense of entitlement compared to continuing generation students, so they have a very high level of gratitude for being here. However, this can kind of be a double-edged sword that could manifest in imposter syndrome and feeling like maybe they don't even deserve to be here when they very much do. They also have a high level of gratitude and obligation toward their family. And this kind of collectivistic mindset can actually be a very strong asset in college. Despite the dominant culture typically being more individualistic, there are a lot of benefits that collectivistic cultures can bring not only the university, but our society as a whole, and these should be celebrated. Students also have a high desire to connect and engage with faculty. Again, they're very highly motivated, but this desire might not be reflected in their behavior just due to being in a completely new culture of professional communication and not really knowing how to connect and engage. And lastly, first-gen students possess a huge amount of critical consciousness and cultural wealth, which we will talk about much more in a few slides. However, there are, of course, barriers to first-generation student success, and we need to address these in order to support them fully. You're probably familiar with a lot of these: low extracurricular involvement, social isolation, navigating the hidden curriculum, having not much of a professional network or maybe no professional network from their parents or families. They have limited exposure to career options, and they underutilize campus resources compared to their peers. I will specifically be focusing on a few of these, including extracurricular involvement, social isolation, and utilization of campus resources, all of which can be addressed in a first-year seminar. But before we shift to talking about the first-year seminar itself, I also want to highlight the demographic breakdown of first-generation students at Penn State. So you can see from this table, also from the data digest, this includes all Penn State campuses, again, undergraduate only. But you can see that on the left is a breakdown of first-generation demographics by race and ethnicity, and on the right is non-generation or first-generation or continuing generation. And you can see that the percentage of Black and Hispanic or Latino students, which are the green and the navy blue here, are almost twice as high for first-generation students compared to continuing generation. And for international students and Asian students at the top and bottom here, those numbers are also slightly higher for first-generation students. So I think this is really important to keep in mind because first-generation students are bringing a lot more identities to college than just first-gen. And these intersecting identities really need to be considered when we're developing supports for students. We also know that first-gen students often come from low-income backgrounds, but this is not always the case. And I couldn't find any data on socioeconomic status of students from Penn State, but do keep in mind that that is another identity that they may be bringing to campus. But I think it's important to highlight this, and it can often be known as first-gen students being the hidden minority. You know, we often focus on things like socioeconomic status or race and ethnicity or gender and these other things. First-gen can sometimes be forgotten about. It's certainly becoming more well-known in recent years, but it is something that has been not really the focus of developing student supports. But even so, as we continue to grow those supports for first-generation students, we shouldn't be forgetting about the other identities that they bring to our campuses. And so in the next slide, I'll share a model to kind of conceptualize first-gen students that really embraces all of their different identities and celebrates those unique assets that they bring, rather than asking students to assimilate to the dominant culture of college life in order for them to succeed. And so this model, called the Critical Cultural Wealth Model, was proposed by Patton Garriott from the University of Denver in 2020. And I really like this framework because it avoids pathologizing students and instead places emphasis on the systems and structures around them that impact their success. And so when we think about obstacles to student success, we often start by thinking about what a student may be lacking and what we could give the student, right? However, this model proposes that we instead start with these structural and institutional conditions. So really, we should be asking not why do students fail, but why do we fail them through these conditions, right? It's important to remember that these conditions can vary based on one's identity. So again, when students have many intersecting identities, they could be facing unique conditions that we should be keeping in mind. If we can remove conditions like exploitation, marginalization, powerlessness, cultural imperialism, and violence, we've probably solved 95% of the issue in terms of barriers to student success. So of course, that is the goal, is to remove all of these structural conditions. But as we know, unfortunately, it is unlikely that we're going to be able to remove these conditions entirely, at least in the immediate future. So this is where the rest of the model comes into play and how we can facilitate student success in spite of those conditions. So when the conditions persist, we can empower students by helping them reflect on their experiences, and those can be positive or negative experiences. But helping them reflect on those can lead to greater cultural wealth in this bottom box, as well as richer social and emotional experiences here, right? Both of these experiences can facilitate positive academic and career outcomes if we follow these arrows either to the right or up above. Not both of, one of these conditions is required in order for these positive outcomes to take place. This model focuses more on cultural wealth because it is more of a systems perspective of student success rather than an individual perspective. Although social emotional experiences at an individual level can still lead to these outcomes, right? But the focus here is going to be on cultural wealth, right? And so what do we mean when we talk about cultural wealth? There's some examples listed there, but essentially it's defined as kind of unique assets that students of diverse identities bring to college and should be encouraged to build upon. You know, this is wealth that they possess, that they are not deficits, as we oftentimes think of students experiencing challenges from a deficit-based lens. So these can include things like resilience, or having high aspirations and hope despite experiencing barriers. It can also include family and community capital, which we can support by embracing students' family support, their resourcefulness, and their collective mindset, as I mentioned in the previous slide. And it also, a huge part of cultural wealth is a student's critical consciousness. So an awareness of how one is impacted by power, privilege, and oppression with a perceived capacity to enact change in that space, right? Many first-gen students have kind of stated that understanding their positionality in terms of socioeconomic status has been critical to increasing their success in college because they're able to kind of see themselves within the dominant culture, how they might fit or not fit within that, but they're able to kind of reflect on that and then put it into practice, whatever may be needed for them. And so we can also see how this cultural wealth can sometimes stem from these conditions, right? So, we think about something like resilience, that's going to be in the face of probably something negative or a barrier, like I said. But it can include a lot of strengths beyond that, such as family capital. That's not necessarily stemming from a negative condition. That could be stemming from something very positive. So it's important to keep that in mind, that cultural wealth doesn't only arise from negative conditions, although it can oftentimes. And so when we help students reflect on their experiences, these social emotional experiences or their cultural wealth, that can lead to better academic and career outcomes, like I said, and this would be a primary goal of the first year seminar. So what are first year seminars in general? So it's a 1-credit course typically taken during a student's first year. The requirement may be based on their campus of enrollment, and it can vary based on college or department. So like I mentioned, each college or even a major might have their own first year seminar. And the purpose of a first year seminar is to facilitate successful transition of new students to Penn State, promote engagement with other members of the campus community, and introduce university and campus resources. And the goals for a first year seminar are the same, but they take it one step further. So they facilitate transition through identity development. This could be building on cultural wealth, as we just talked about, so helping students reflect on who they are as students, individuals, or whatever other identities they may hold. It can be done by encouraging students to share personal stories and explore how they relate to each other within the class and also outside of class and understand their positionality at the university. And I think an important piece of this is also reflecting on a student's values and helping them evaluate if they are living in accordance with their values and how they might be able to do that more. And I'll share an example of that later on. This class would also promote engagement, but for specifically a sense of belonging, which may not be as much of a focus in a typical first-year seminar. So some suggestions that I would have to do this effectively would be to have a smaller class size, maybe less than 20 students, so that they feel more comfortable with each other and can form deeper connections with their classmates. But it's important to identify supports outside of the class as well. And so to facilitate this, instructors can invite guest speakers from offices maybe like Health Promotion and Wellness or CAPS or other offices and groups on campus. And research has shown that students who are engaged outside the classroom have a greater sense of belonging and investment in their education, which leads to better academic outcomes as well. And so requiring out-of-class activities, in my opinion, is really essential for this type of course. And so I'll share some examples of how I did that. Of course, we still need to provide resources, just like a regular first-year seminar, but these resources can be really tailored to first-gen student needs in understanding college culture and what the resources actually mean and how to utilize them. Because it's one thing to provide a resource, it's another thing to teach students how to use it. So one example could be teaching students about the self-directed nature of university coursework and learning, because they might be coming from a wide range of academic contexts. So this is an opportunity for them to really calibrate expectations of them and maybe get guidance from offices like Penn State Learning, which offers tutoring and other services for students. Part of this could also be making connections with faculty and staff, as we talked about that being a desire first-gen students have, but they just need to know how to do it, right? So coaching students on how to do things like utilize office hours. And as a previous career counselor, I cannot overstate the importance of networking for student success, particularly considering that they are career motivated in coming to college. And so this course could also be a less intimidating place for students to practice networking with guest speakers and other individuals. And so to share a little bit about my experience with Ag 297, which was first-gen, first-year engagement and success, this will kind of illustrate what a first-gen, first-year seminar could look like. To be transparent, I can't take credit for creating this course from scratch. That was done by Tammy Shannon, if you knew her, and I kind of took over the class for her last fall after she departed from the university. But with that said, I've only taught this one time, so I'd love to invite any feedback that you may have. So this was a class of 13 students, 2 co-instructors, and 1 teaching assistant, all of whom were first gen, and all of the students were from the College of Agricultural Sciences. Take a look at this description and you'll see that the description largely aligns with what we have discussed so far, highlighting transition to college life, learning tools and university resources, awareness of self and others. And these were achieved through the following learning objectives. So becoming active learners, developing critical thinking, increasing awareness of university programs, fostering academic success, and creating a community of practice, right? And these learning objectives were achieved through inviting guest speakers to the class, doing in-class activities, and asking students to participate in events outside of class, as these events would contribute to their final presentation, where I essentially asked them to tell me what you did this semester, share some pictures with the class. It can be really fun, but I also asked them to connect those experiences to the learning objectives to show and promote self-reflection on how those experiences were helpful to them. There was no required number of events or type of event, but the syllabus, which I'll show you now, kind of provided some suggestions on things they could do, such as this wellness workshop or the education abroad fair. But this sample syllabus can kind of give you an idea of what our class time looked like. I tried to include names of speakers so students could reach out to them later on, participate in that networking. Also links to resources that they could access and possible events, like I mentioned. For each guest speaker, students were also required to write and submit 2 questions and 3 comments for each speaker, and were encouraged to share these with speakers during class. Reflecting on Act 297, there are a lot of things that I would continue to do, but also a lot of things I would change. For the sake of time, I'll just talk about one success and one change that I might make next time. So we talked about the importance of identity development and acting in accordance with one's values. So at one point during the course, one of our guest speakers canceled, so I had to come up with another activity, right? We try to be flexible. And so I asked students to complete the Meaningful Work Kit through Stanford. And I think this is a great resource. It's available publicly, so feel free to go to that website and check it out. But essentially, it asks students to rank their top values in 3 categories: skills, work culture, and core values, and then offers various writing prompts for students to reflect on where these values might show up in their lives. So this activity was really insightful because it was an opportunity for them to identify disconnects between their goals and lived experiences. And so I would definitely incorporate this into future classes, but I might do it a little earlier on to set that foundation and that tone for the following classes. One thing that I might change in the future is I would do more community building at the beginning of class. So to be completely honest, this was the first class I have ever taught. And so I was pretty nervous at the beginning, and I definitely skipped some steps. So I kind of used the first class for icebreakers and explaining the syllabus. And then the following week, we jumped right into guest speakers, right? Next time, I might have the first 2 or even 3 weeks of class be centered around bonding activities for students, because I think that would have created a much more welcoming environment for students to speak up more and engage with the class, because I found that they were a pretty quiet group throughout the semester. And so I certainly would want to encourage more trust and safety and belonging in the very beginning stages of the class, so they could really make the most of the whole semester. And I'll share one bonus success, which was our student farm dinner, where students went after class and actually cooked their own dinner at the student farm. It was the first time a lot of them ever ate tofu, which was really fun to watch. So that was a really fun event. The only challenge with that was because it was outside of class, less than half of the students were able to attend. And so that's something that to try to keep in mind. I tried to incorporate field trips. That's not always possible for everyone, but something that can be really nice if you have the ability to do so. And so I hope this presentation has given you some ideas on how to start or improve your own first-gen first-year seminar. And I hope to be able to collaborate with you if that is something you would like to do. I have some questions here if you would like to consider any of them before the discussion on Thursday. These are just conversation starters, but I really want our conversation to be whatever would be most helpful. I also have an example syllabus from UC Davis if you would like to take a look at that. They have a very robust first-gen first-year seminar program. So I look forward to hearing your feedback on that, as well as the presentation today. But thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this session, and I look forward to seeing you at the summit.